can't tell you you're going to cure your cancer. I can tell you you're going to improve your odds of curing your cancer, but I can't tell you do this and you're going to be cured of anything. Even if the things that I recommend didn't improve their health at all, it always improved their state of well-being. And well-being is pretty much a scientific term for happiness. So if you're enjoying life more, if you're happier in your life, then life is more worthwhile. And if life is more worthwhile, you'll probably be healthier, physically healthier. So that was my work. I closed my practice about 3 years ago and wrote the book because I wanted to reach a much larger audience. And I now spend my time teaching 2 classes every week locally here in Marin County, California. One class is called Mastery of Aging, and the other class, which I teach at College of Marin, is called In Your Own Hands. And then I also write for Psych Central, which has 7 million unique monthly views. I write 2 articles every week for them. So that's how I spend my time. As far as my own health, I had always lived with some debilitating chronic conditions, the most serious of which is I have a primary immunodeficiency disease, which means my immune system isn't up to what it should be. And so I have to be careful. But I have a number of other conditions. And so I found by walking my talk, by living the way I was recommending to my patients and now to my students, my well-being improved dramatically and my health stabilized. And on rare occasion, I even made my health better.
I was just reading a statistic, or I think it's in your book even, that 133 million Americans suffer from chronic illnesses or autoimmune diseases, for example, arthritis and that type of thing. And I find that number to be astounding. But I think in your book, you said something that you actually had been through the medical system umpteen times until they finally found that you were suffering from several autoimmune diseases or conditions.
It's really a problem. I did not get correctly diagnosed. I had been suffering all my life with various symptoms and saw a number of different doctors who all thought they knew what was going on with me. None of them had a clue. And finally, I guess I was around in my early 50s, I went to a big academic medical center, the University of California at San Francisco, which is one of the most respected academic medical centers in the world. And they started coming up with all these diagnoses. And I didn't know whether to be scared or relieved. I mean, on the one hand, I was relieved that they seemed to actually know what they were doing. And yet some of the diagnoses they were giving me were pretty scary. So there are a lot of people out there who go years and even decades incorrectly diagnosed. And when doctors incorrectly diagnose them, then the treatments that they're using are not going to work and in many cases cause more harm. So I recommend to people, if you've been suffering for a long time, if your medical doctors are not helping you, then if you haven't done it already, go to the nearest large academic medical center. And on my website, I have a page of a list of the largest centers in the country. So for example, in New England, you've got Mass General, Brigham and Women's, Beth Israel. In New York City, you've got a Columbia Presbyterian, New York, NYU, Langone and Mount Sinai, and then further south you've got Penn, and then further south you've got John Hopkins, and so forth. And there are places like that all over the country. And those are the places I recommend going to, because if you go there, they've seen it all, and they will be more likely to correctly diagnose you and therefore be more likely to give you the proper treatment.
Yeah, and there's plenty of them here on the West Coast as well. In Seattle, we have University of Washington, and San Francisco, I'm sure, has great hospitals as well to get this taken care of or to find out what's going on with you if you're stuck. Um, so let's go through your book, and at the beginning of the book, you start talking about what is the cause of disease and sort of the theories out there around suffering with these particular diseases, and kind of connecting that with our mind and the health of our bodies.
Yeah. Uh, One of the things I used to run into, especially with cancer patients, is upon getting diagnosed, they all, practically every one of them, had it in their heads that they had done something to bring it on, to cause the cancer. And one of the things that makes it worse is that well-meaning friends ask questions like, "Oh, what kind of food were you eating?" And they kind of figure, "Oh, if the person was eating fast food all the time, junk food, and I'm eating healthy food, then I don't have to worry about cancer." Wrong. There are a lot of people out there who ate all the right foods, who were exercising every day, who were meditating, who were getting enough sleep, doing everything right, and they still were diagnosed with serious cancers. So, one of the things I worked with people on is helping them realize that they didn't cause their cancer. Um, and at the same time, it's very tricky because I'm teaching them things they can do to make things better. And as soon as I start talking to them about things they can do to make things better, of course, they start thinking, well, gee, if I wasn't doing this before, then maybe I caused my disease. And so I make it clear to people we're all doing the best we can. That's all we can do.
Hmm.
Maybe this person didn't have this information before. So what could they do? They were doing the best they could. And even if they did everything perfectly, there are still plenty of those people who were doing everything right and still uh, came down with terrible diseases. So, so I explain to people all the different things that cause cancers, and it has and other diseases too, and it has to do with your genetics. It has to do with environmental exposures to toxins. It has to do with exposures to pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungi, uh, parasites. Parasites do terrible damage. Viruses. A lot of cancers, in fact, we now know are caused by having had a certain virus early in life. So there's just a lot of things that are out of our control. But the one thing that we can do is there are things we can do to make things better. Um, we can't avoid toxins and pathogens. I mean, we can avoid them to some extent, but if you're going to live in the world, you're going to be exposed to deadly pathogens. It's just part of living. So my view is just we want to do everything we can possibly do to optimize our chances and just to make life better, to live
Hmm.
a happier life.
So tell us, a little bit more about what are your theories of suffering? Because I know that was a part of the book that sort of set the stage for some of the things to come, and how that's connected with the mind. What can we do about it? So we get a diagnosis, we have arthritis or we have a cancer or something like that. What can we do next?
So let me give you an example. I I have two different forms of arthritis, and with one of them, I get these unbelievably excruciating, stinging pains in my joints. And um, when that happens, I often find myself with this thought. It's an automatic thought that comes into my head, says, uh, I'm screwed. My life is over. I'm just going downhill. It's going to get worse. I'm getting older. It's just going to keep getting worse. I'm going to get more and more debilitating things. So the pain is very real. It hurts, but that's not the worst of the suffering. The real suffering comes from the thoughts I have. Catastrophizing. I just make everything worse by blowing it way out of proportion. I have these visions of things getting worse every day, and the reality is we can't know what's coming tomorrow. One form of arthritis I had actually improved. So there's no way, it doesn't do any good to catastrophize, to in our minds make things worse. It only makes things worse. That's the real source of the worst suffering. We bring the suffering on through unhealthy thinking. And that's a tricky problem, because then people think, oh, well, then I'll just push those thoughts away. But that doesn't work very well, because the research shows that the more energy we put into trying to get rid of thoughts, unhealthy thoughts, the stronger those thoughts get. The more energy we put into getting rid of an icky feeling, the stronger that feeling gets. There's an expression, resistance breeds persistence. And so that's really the source of the worst suffering. It's not the symptoms themselves. It's what goes on in our minds that's the source of our worst suffering.
I'll say there's an old adage, pain is inevitable, but suffering is your option.
Yeah.
I totally, as I was reading about some of the things that you've written, I was taken by that, because I agree with it 100%.
Yeah, pain is it's part of life. Sickness is part of life. We can do everything right and still have those things. But the suffering, there's a lot we can do with that. And just working with suffering, working with changing our mind, creating a healthier state of mind, makes life just so much richer, and we can live a much happier life. You look at someone like, I'm blanking on his name now. Okay, he's had ALS for 50 years.
Oh, Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. There's a case. This guy has been quadriplegic most of his life, and yet he lives a very full life. There have been a number of inspirational people like that who have led the way for us, showing us that no matter how bad our physical condition, we can still live a happy life.
Yeah. I want to ask a question. I know in your book you start out with the idea that someone is already ill, and that their disease is a natural process, that kind of thing. But I wonder, the way you're talking about the mind has a lot to do with how we feel about what we're suffering through, or how we're going to deal with it. But what is the mind's role perhaps in creating disease in the first place? Or do you see any kind of connection at all in that?
There is a connection, and this is a very sensitive topic. You can imagine why. As I said earlier, people I worked with who had cancer, they all wondered, what did I do to cause the cancer?
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, there is a lot of research showing that people who live with a lot of anger and rage, we all know people out there who are known as rageaholics.
Yeah.
They have higher rates of cardiovascular disease. All things being equal, they have higher rates of cardiovascular disease. There are other people who are very reticent to self-express. They're afraid to ask for favors. If someone asks them for a favor, they're afraid to say no. If someone says something they don't like, they're afraid to speak their truth, those people have a higher rate of cancer. Now, it doesn't mean, I want to be really clear about this. It doesn't mean that if you have that type of passive personality, you're going to get cancer. That is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
It does mean, all other things being equal, you are more likely to develop cancer. So there are certain personality styles that that sort of predispose us to certain diseases. Autoimmune disease, um, the evidence is a little less strong for this, but there is quite a bit of evidence that there is an association between autoimmune disease and being afraid to speak up, being afraid to speak our minds, being afraid to say no when someone asks for a favor, or being afraid to ask other people for a favor. Um, you know, people like that do have higher rates of autoimmune disease. And it, no one really has the answer to what this is all about, but we think that it has to do with the immune system. Um, if, if, if so, one of the people I worked with, he doesn't have a formal training program, but I got consultations with him, was Lawrence Lashan. Larry Lashan wrote a book called Cancer as a Turning Point. It was published in '89, still very current. And he talked about how in his roughly 50 years of working with cancer patients, advanced metastatic cancer patients, that when he helped people to identify what they wanted their lives to be about, to really step up to the plate and take charge of their lives, their health improved. And he cites a lot of cases where they were given just weeks to live, and they went into long-term remission. Some of them, the cancer just went away. So our personality styles have a lot to do with how healthy we are. But again, there's no one-to-one direct correlation. You can do everything wrong and not get sick, and you can do everything right, have just a perfect person, healthy personality, and be diagnosed with a terrible disease. So
Yeah, I know we probably all have examples in our own families of the aunt and uncle that, smoked, drank, did everything they could possibly do to kill themselves and lived to be 90. I have a couple of aunts that were just like that, wild, totally wild women. But so it makes me wonder then what possibility there is that belief in illness or not a belief in illness plays here, because you know how some people in their family history, they have this genetic predisposition, let's say, to heart attack. Men, my dad died at 50, my uncle or my grandfather, he died at 50, and I'm nearing 50 now, it's going to happen to me too. What do you think, what would you say about belief and how that plays into this?
let me give you an example from my life. Um, in January of 1991, one night I came home and I felt all the classic symptoms of the flu. It was the peak of the flu season. Uh, I was just overwhelmed with overwhelming fatigue, muscle aches, chills, all the classic symptoms of the flu. And it just so happened, uh, when I was much younger, I was into the martial arts, and there was a karate tournament on TV that night. And I watched the karate tournament. Um, I remember watching this tournament and getting so into it. I actually thought I was on the floor competing in the tournament. And I could feel my body just alive, like as if you were competing. And I remember also, while watching the tournament, saying to myself, I'm not getting sick. No way. It's not going to happen. And they weren't just empty words. when I was saying these things, like, I am not going to get sick, it's not going to happen, I refuse, I totally believed that it's just not going to happen. Yeah, these symptoms are real right now, but these symptoms aren't going to survive in my body. This virus cannot survive in my body because I'm not going to let it.
Yeah.
By 10 o'clock, the karate tournament was over. I got up and I realized I was all better. The symptoms were completely gone. So how did I cure myself of the flu? Well, I know how I did it. I knew beyond every shadow of a doubt in my mind that I was going to kill that virus, that I was going to win. And I did. Now, great. So that night was life-changing for me, because that night I realized that I now had the ability to cure myself of disease, and I had the ability to teach other people how to do it. So I was so on fire with this until I got a cold. And the beginning of the symptoms of the cold, I tried it again, same thing, and it didn't work.
Dang it.
And then I got sick with something else, and I tried it again, and it didn't work. And I tried teaching it to other people, and it never seemed to work. So I was very discouraged. What I finally realized in talking to experts in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, psycho-oncology, applied psychophysiology, mind-body medicine, in talking to experts in the field, we all came to one conclusion, which is, this works only if you know. You have to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can do this. If you know beyond a shadow of a doubt, then your mind is powerful enough to cure disease. Well, how do you get to the point of knowing? So I'm an expert in hypnosis. So I figure, okay, I know how to know. I can make a belief into knowing through hypnosis. Nope, couldn't do it.
Larry, in that story, though, how important was watching the karate tournament? Because is that part of you being in contact with the part of you that was incredibly empowered, not only personally, but energetically, emotionally, connecting to the part of you that was strongest?
Yes. If that karate tournament hadn't come on, I probably wouldn't have been able to do what I did. I was energized by life. I was competitive that night. I was actually on the floor in my mind. I was competing. And, so I've even tried that. So one time I remember getting symptoms.
Larry, there's something going on with your mic because you're fading in and out. Are your hands on your mic or something on your computer?
No, my mic is built into my monitor.
Okay, so now I can hear you really good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it was coming from here. I tried that same thing again. I figured, yes, you're absolutely right. So I recorded a karate tournament to have, this was back, it was a video cassette at the time, 25 years ago. And I remember pulling out the cassette the next time I didn't feel well, watching this tournament, a different tournament, and saying the same things to myself. And it didn't go anywhere. It did not work. It just didn't work. And
Larry,
I know why it didn't work too. The reason it didn't work is because I was trying to make it work. And that just doesn't work. You have to know beyond any you have to be convinced. You have to know beyond any shadow of a doubt that you can do this. And the problem is I was trying to make it work. That's just not good enough. It's not powerful enough. So in answer to your question, the mind is so powerful. I believe the mind can cure almost any disease.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think the mind can cure any disease.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's any disease out there that cannot be cured by the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, how do you access that power?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
I know. Why don't they study the placebo effect? Right? We disregard the placebo effect in all of these drug studies, and it's like, wait a minute, isn't that the key? 20% of these people cured themselves because they thought they had the pill.
Absolutely. You look at if you look at the studies on antidepressants, I mean, the number of people on antidepressants today is staggering, and yet, if you really look at the studies, the efficacy studies on antidepressants, you find that they're really not much better than placebo. They're a little bit better, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people have gotten over their depression on a placebo, and they thought they were on the real thing. Obviously, if you tell them it's a placebo, it's not going to work. But they really were convinced they were taking the real antidepressant, and they were no longer depressed.
Well, you remind me of two stories. I'll make them short. The first one, I was listening to a motivational speaker talk about a doctor who had prescribed laughing to people who were depressed, and basically said you should laugh for a minute a day, 2-3 times a day. And then related a story about a guy who had gotten cancer, and he decided he was going to laugh his way out of it, and proceeded to rent videos of funny movies, and over the next month or two watched them over and over again and laughed, and went back and the cancer was cured, which I think speaks very much to what you were saying about using the karate tournament, and it had gone away, and your cold had gone away, or the flu. So I think that speaks a lot to it, and it was a really funny seminar. I listened to it on driving in the car, and he'll take you through and have everybody laugh, and by the end of it, you're busting up, and you don't know why.
Yeah, that's it's called laugh yoga, or laughing yoga, and it's a form of yoga taught in India. And in India, in the big cities, at lunchtime, you'll see groups of people congregating in parks, laughing hysterically. And it just starts off with one guy saying, "Okay, now everyone follow me, ha, ha, ha." Oh, oh. And it starts like that, but before you know it, they're looking at each other laughing, and pretty soon it becomes real. And I mean, think about how you feel when you're laughing versus when you're feeling depressed. It changes body chemistry. It makes you healthier. When we're laughing, we are actually physiologically much healthier. So laughing is very healthy.
But laughing is also life affirming. And so one of the things I'm hearing as a theme, and I don't know if I'm drawing too much of a conclusion, but even when it comes to our vulnerability from our autoimmune systems, and whether our behavior or thoughts are working against or for that, again, without blaming people for their thoughts or their behavior, at the end of the day, one of the reasons I don't eat a lot of junk food and eat well isn't because I'm a food Nazi, because it is not life affirming. So I'm engaged in doing the things that are right for me, even though in some cases I believe they're totally placebo. These guys tease me because I drink a green drink. I'm not convinced that the algae in this thing is saving my life, but I buy it and I do it because it's an act of hearing for myself and learning when I'm feeling bad about myself to retrain myself to be self-loving in some way has been very hard, but I think critical. Is there any root to the act of self-love, whether it's hiking, fresh air, laughter, whatever, right? Is that too great an extrapolation of your experience?
You have just asked the very best question imaginable, because I believe from the evidence that, and this is the main thing I teach, is that it's not what you do so much. It's not the specifics of what you're doing so much as taking charge of your life. So if you're drinking blue-green algae, I don't know whether that works, but the fact that you're doing something for yourself, that does work. There is healing in that. So whatever we do, even if there's no proven efficacy for some of the things we do, it almost, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter. Because if we are doing things that we believe are good for us, and we're taking charge of our lives, we are self-empowered. And just being self-empowered is very good for our health. So, people who just veg out in front of the TV, don't do anything for themselves, they tend to not be very healthy. They die young. So there are a lot of people who buy all these weird things, herbs and food supplements, and you can tell I'm not into that stuff. However, I would bet that the people who are taking those things are healthier, because whether there's no proven efficacy or not, they're doing things for themselves. They're taking charge. They're stepping up to the plate. They feel empowered. And just feeling empowered, you're going to be healthier.
That's right. I mean, even the vegging out in front of the TV, normally that would make you unhealthy. Unless you're our viewer, then you're living forever. You're doing the right thing.
Yes, it depends on
Sorry.
It's absolutely true.
Exactly right.
Because we have thought-provoking things. We make your mind work.
Yes, you will live forever.
Exactly.
Lori, I have a question about your mind.
Oops, I better move.
Whose mind?
I mean, I was listening to you a few minutes ago, and I think the question what came to me is the problem with your mind is your mind.
Yeah.
And in the example that you used about the karate tournament, in that moment, you weren't thinking.
Right.
You were just being.
Yes.
And when you went back to record it, then you were thinking. And therein lies the problem.
Well,
You're right. You're right, Roger. That's awesome.
You guys are asking I can't imagine better questions. I mean, these last two comments. Wow, you're totally right. The mind. I mean, that's what we have over lower animals. We have the prefrontal cortex. We have the ability to analyze things. We have the ability to analyze our thoughts. There's no other animal on the planet that can analyze its thoughts. But that's also our biggest problem. If you look at dogs, it's very interesting. You look at a dog that attacks someone versus a person who attacks another person. Well, the dog, it's just some physiologic thing, something tripped the brain into the dog thinking it was threatened, and therefore, and it can't analyze the situation. It thought it was threatened, so it goes on attack. But then, as soon as it realizes it's safe, it just completely calms down. It's over, and the dog is over it. And we don't do that. We hold on to things. Our minds are our biggest enemy. And yet, if we can figure out how to train the mind, and this is the thing that interests me the most, is how can we train the mind to do these magical things, to cure illness, to just be happier, live the most fulfilling, happy life we can live. And it's really a challenge. There are a lot of forms of mind training out there, but I don't know of any of them that are doing what we would like them to do. I mean, the most well-known and popular form of mind training today in 2015 is mindfulness practice. You can learn mindfulness through going to a Buddhist meditation center, or you can learn it by taking an MBSR class, mindfulness-based stress reduction. People usually refer to it as MBSR. It's in every major city, every college campus. You can learn it by just finding a group somewhere taught by a mindfulness teacher. There are other forms of meditation, like transcendental meditation and other forms of mantra meditations. There are breathing techniques. There's biofeedback of all different types, neurofeedback, EEG biofeedback. There are any number of things, self-hypnosis and mental imagery of all different types. But one problem is there's a dose-dependent relationship. So monks have been flown to Wisconsin. Richard Davidson is a researcher at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And the Dalai Lama has been sending monks over from India to Wisconsin to be studied, and they study their brains. They'll put them in fMRI machines and other forms of other scanners and EEG, and they will study their brains while they're meditating, while they're doing certain mental processes. And they've discovered that the brains of these people are more highly developed. They've actually grown their brains. Now, the problem is, are the rest of us willing to do what those monks did? Those monks are meditating for 5 or more hours a day, every day, day after day, year after year. I don't know that I'm not willing to do that. There was a case, there was a psychiatrist in Australia back in the early 70s, Ainsley Mears, Dr. Ainsley Mears. And he was really kind of way ahead of his time. He taught people, he started getting a lot of people who had serious metastatic cancers. And he taught them to meditate. And the people who meditated the most did the best. There was one guy, I'm blanking on his name, but anyway, who meditated all day, every day. And his cancer, this was 1973. And here we are in 2015. This guy is alive and well. By the way, he was told at one point he had probably 2 weeks to live. His cancer, he had a bone cancer that metastasized throughout his body, and he was given 2 weeks to live. That was in 1973. Today in 2015, he runs a large alternative cancer center in Australia. And so what made him better? He did a lot of things, but he did not get the traditional treatment. He gave up on that very early. So even the oncologist said the amount of treatment he got could not have cured his cancer. And they have no answer to what cured his cancer, but he seems to think it's what he did with his mind. So if we're willing to do that, who knows what we're capable of. But most of the people who worked with Ainsley Mears were told, well, if you meditate, this could help. And they said, I got a month to live. The last thing I want to do is spend my dying days meditating.
Yeah.
So they weren't willing to do it.
Yeah, and also those monks, I mean, they may live forever, or it may just feel like that, because it's not a great, joyful life they look like they're living. You know, we also have examples of people who are curing themselves by laughing. So depending on, back to or is there a link between our ancestry genetics?
Whoa. Let's back up for a second. What did you just say about the monks?
Well, they don't look like they're having a very joyful experience. So most of us aren't going to, if I have a month to live and I'm going to sit around meditating all day long, I can imagine that doesn't even feel life affirming.
Oh, okay.
Right? No, but my real point will go back to sometimes I think we misapply Eastern traditions to Western genetic bodies, and they may not mix. it may not be a good fit. So for some people, meditation could be a very powerful tool. And it's not that it's never not. But then again, you can laugh yourself possibly into a cure for cancer. You can do other things for a cure for cancer. I mean, the life affirming measure, and the idea that my mind is no longer, my thoughts are no longer a hardware. I recognize them as a input issue, not a software issue. However I get there. Mm-hmm. Would you separate that, or is this the only path you've ever seen work, is heavy doses of meditation?
First of all, I just want to say something about the monks. It's generally believed that they are joyful, but it's an inner joy. It's not that they're laughing all day long, but they live with a degree of inner peace, and there is a degree of joy that they do live with. And you're also right about Eastern versus Western. What works in the East may not work in the West. However, even in the East, the vast majority of Asians do not meditate. They don't want any part of it. People in Asia, they have different customs than we have. But the one thing they have, they're very much like us in that they just want to be having fun. They don't want to be doing serious meditation. In that sense, Asians are no different than we are. Now, regarding meditating, there's no one form of meditation that has proven itself to cure disease. I think different things work for different people. For some people, it's not any form of sitting meditation at all. It could be yoga, it could be Tai Chi, it could be laughing yoga. I think the best thing, one of the things that we need to look at is the field of psychology, because there are tremendous advances in the field of psychology in the last 10 to 15 years that most people aren't aware of. In particular, if you look at the field of positive psychology, it's kind of a weird name. Most people confuse positive psychology with positive thinking. Those are two totally different things. Positive psychology is a name that was chosen, I think, in the late 90s for a new form of psychotherapy. Traditionally, from Freud in the 1880s up until around 2000, for roughly the first 120 years, psychotherapy was about looking at what's wrong with you and then trying to fix what's wrong with you. And in the last 15 years, there's been enormous progress made in the field of positive psychology, where instead of looking to find what's wrong and fixing that, to look at, here are the behaviors that we know improve well-being, and let's engage in these behaviors. You don't even need to figure out stuff about your childhood. More and more research shows that that's totally unnecessary, that we can dramatically improve our state of mind and state of health by just simply engaging in healthy behaviors. Things like diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, but it's much more than those things. It's finding meaning and purpose in our lives, social support. In fact, the evidence in the field of positive psychology shows that social support is at the top of the list, that people who are members of a community where they feel a sense of belonging, where they feel like they are valued, contributing members of some community, if you have that, I don't care how much psychotherapy you get, it's gonna pale in comparison to that. And this is something that's been lost in modern society. Today, people talk about how many Facebook friends you have. In times gone by, where people lived in small villages and everyone looked after everyone else, people just lived with a higher degree of well-being, much lower rates of stress. They just had a better quality of life. All the technology we have today has worsened our quality of life. And big deal. So we have electricity, we have cars, we have refrigerators and everything. But that pales in comparison to community. Feeling like you are a truly valued, contributing member of a community, like you are essential to a community. If you can do that, there's nothing better.
So I have a couple of comments. Number one, I think that we need to be really careful with the thing of saying, well, either meditation is going to work or that doesn't work, and Western medicine and psychology will work. It's like I've heard the Dalai Lama talk about this. It's the best of both. We need to get away from this duality thing, right? There's things that the East gives us that are very beneficial. Meditation works well. All these mindfulness trainings work well. But like he says, if you have a broken bone, it's not going to help you. You need to go to a doctor. So I think that we really need to incorporate both of those. But I'd like to get back, Larry, to your mind again, because I think it's really important. And maybe, I don't know if you can delineate this, but can you identify like that experience that you had that night watching the karate tournament versus what the difference was when you were trying to think about it? Because I think right in that space somewhere is the key to what we're talking about here.
Well, I really love all the questions you people are bringing in. That is just an amazing question. Thank you. Yeah, that is the key. I don't have the answer, unfortunately.
If you did, you'd be a multimillionaire.
I have a thought to that, and I'll add in a story to my own life. Back 20 odd years ago, I used to race bicycles, and I remember hearing someone talking and saying that you can't with your mind change your blood pressure. You can't with your mind change your heart rate. And I disagreed with them because I know I can change my heart rate within about a minute's worth of time sitting and doing absolutely nothing except for getting myself in the mind of that bike race. And I'm able to think through it, think exactly what happened. There's almost a soundtrack in my mind of what's going on. Within a minute, my heart rate will be at about 150. I will be sweating. And it's funny because if the song comes on the radio, I got to watch myself because I'm getting into it and I'm jumping up and down, and I realize that my heart rate's up. But it is truly possible to put yourself in that mindset without I think that it's all a matter of how well you can control your mind and the thoughts that you have.
So why don't you make yourself warmer back there and stop complaining about how cold it is? Just sit on your couch and imagine you're like in the desert and it's 105.
I've heard that story too.
I mean, the thing is, we can do a lot of that. You know, it's very easy to raise and lower your heart rate with the mind. That's very easy. You can learn to do that in seconds. You can learn to control a lot of physiological functions just with the mind. But curing a disease, whether it's a flu or a cancer or something like that, as I said before, I have no doubt the mind is capable of curing us of literally any disease. It's just that how to do it, and the problem is, as you pointed out, thinking about it, that gets in the way. There's a guy, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He used to be at the University of Chicago. He took a job with the University of California, Irvine, and changed his name to Mike. So now he's Mike Csikszentmihalyi. But anyway, he is famous for creating the concept of flow. And flow is something similar to being in the zone. It's where we get beyond thought. So I was talking to a friend of mine who, even though he's 58 years old, he still plays baseball a little bit. And he was describing to me that when he plays center field, and when he's out there in the field, and when the ball is in play, this would be true of football, anything. He's not thinking about anything. He's just totally present. And there's no time to be thinking about anything. So, so whether we call it flow or being in the zone, that's a great place to be. However, it's hard to get there, and someone brought this up to the Dalai Lama, the idea of being in the zone. And the Dalai Lama said something to the effect of, well, that's a wonderful state to be in, but it's not that easy to go in and out of it. It just kind of happens. And I don't know how to go into a healing state where I can cure myself of something, or never mind, teach someone else how to do that. I just don't know how to do that.
Well, and we've talked about this a few times before. So what if, in that, when I feel quite often, we talk about our mind, we're talking about our rational mind. That is a small portion of our brain. And we are certainly taking in vast amounts of information that are filtered out and never get to that, nor does a conclusion ever get drawn from that information, both from within our bodies and outside of us. So is it possible then that what you were accessing was something, where then the rational brain, the thoughts that were, the surgical tool you used were your thought, but they were being employed by some other part of your consciousness or brain? And can we invigorate that in states of many states, like meditation for some, or the kind of physical state that's produced with martial arts, or in some cases ecstatic states like laughter? And you kind of, we do kind of work with that as in spirituality, right? You're bringing up your I am presence, or you're bringing up that fire in ourselves that is the truth of something, but it exists in the body. Does that model play at all with your experience?
Yes, and I don't really know much more about it. I just know there are things we can do to bring that about up to a certain point. It's just where I draw the line is using it to actually cure disease. I know it's possible. I am totally convinced it's possible because I did it. But the fact that I haven't been able to do it since tells me I don't know how to get past my mind trying to make it happen. I don't know how to get past it. I have tried mental imagery, hypnosis, biofeedback.
I think it speaks to the whole subject of bliss and following your bliss. My bliss is not yours, nor is it anybody else's. But once you can find it, you can find energy there that nobody else can touch. And I think, and I was most taken by the story about the martial arts because you were there. You hit a certain place in your mind that really did it. And I think that, when you say maybe meditation will do it, if you can find your bliss in meditation, that'll work. For somebody else, it may be running up and down the street and doing something else, but it's a matter of looking for that place in your mind that you can get to that's going to heal. And it's a lifelong journey. At least if we're lucky, we get there sooner.
Most of the experts I've talked to, though, have said they believe that you have to know beyond any shadow of a doubt that you can cure yourself. And that's the hurdle that I struggle with. That night I knew, and you can't try to know.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a conversation with some people the other night about this topic, and I have a master's in psychology, so I did all the study and all that stuff that you do, and I'm more than convinced now at this point in my life that we've been duped. That the mind what we think, how we think, the mind, whatever label you want to call it, is a tool. But we've been taught that the mind is in the control. And I, for one, don't necessarily believe that anymore. Because I think that, I saw a video of a heart surgeon a few years ago talking about doing heart transplants. And there's research now that shows that the heart receives information before the brain, that the heart actually sends information to the brain, not the other way around.
Yes.
So this guy was talking about doing heart surgery and heart transplants, and he made like the most awesome point that you can take a heart out of someone, put it in like a bucket of ice, send it across the country, put it in somebody else, shock it, and that person will come back to life. The heart will start beating again. But if you take the brain out of someone, end of story. But so I think that, and like listening, like the guy that Mike, I can never pronounce his last name, Mike at the University of California, Irvine, talks about being in the flow. And for me, being in the flow is getting that information in my heart and then using my brain as a tool to carry that out. And I'm fascinated because with your story about the karate thing, because I think that we've all done that. We've all had this experience where it's like almost like a mystical experience that we have, and then we try and duplicate it or replicate it again, and it just doesn't work because we weren't in the flow. We weren't following, we weren't allowing the whole system to work. We're trying to control it with our thoughts. And I have my own theory on the mind, but I don't want to get into that right now. But I just think that we need to maybe look at it from a different perspective and say, our mind is a tool, not the thing.
Well, I briefly have a friend, and he got very, very depressed. I mean, massive antidepressants. He's still having suicidal ideology. His life is lovely. He works for, an unnamed major tech company in, east side of Seattle. And the problem was his wife was a friend of mine. And then she's like, I don't know what to do. He's sobbing, and he's still so worried about killing himself. And so I said, great, put him in a car. I'm an hour from him. Get him up here. We went hiking for the day in the sunshine, right? We went and got a nice meal. We had a talk. We didn't talk about anything in particular. We didn't solve his life. And within 2.5 hours, not only does he not want to kill himself, but all of a sudden the sun's shining. He feels better than he has. I'm not a psychologist, but I said to him, I'm pretty sure if you have clinical depression, you can't shift it in 2 hours by going for a hike. It's the person who can't access joy again. I said, he goes, well, what do we do? And I said, it's like being really happy on vacation. We're all capable of being happy and enjoy, and therefore producing potentially a state that would cause healing and well-being. We don't build our lives, unfortunately, to contain this. So unlike these moments that we're chasing, maybe if we realize this is my key to health, longevity, wellness, productivity, all those things, not just my, self-care is no longer a luxury item, which is how most of us treat it. Self-care is a luxury item. Then we start building lives about these moments, right? How can I construct a life where this is more potentially viable? And that's what we're probably not doing. Constructing a life where these moments are, in fact, more likely to take place.
Yeah.
Right. Life is too busy living us, and we're not living our lives. That's kind of the case.
But I don't think we're taking conscious control. And I suspect,
Absolutely.
I think part of this is sort of that cultural, I don't know. I kind of sense that we're not always, in fact, fighting our own belief systems. I think we're fighting some collective belief systems. Only because when I've gone to other countries, unrelated to this, an example being Mexico. I go to Mexico to work, Mexico City. I'm a super early riser. I'm up at 6 a.m., at 9 a.m., at 9 p.m. If I'm not sleeping, I'm in bed. Have been all my life. I get to Mexico City, suddenly I'm a European. I'm up at 10. I go to bed at midnight. It feels completely normal. It's 9 o'clock. We're ready to go eat. 3 weeks I'm there. It's completely different. I come back to the US. I'm back to my normal schedule. I'm aware of being in another very predominant pace of things and being able to, my brain is psyching me right in, syncing me up. So maybe some of this isn't just, I personally can't create this life that would bring about well-being. I'm still stuck in a collective pattern with my fellow Western folk who aren't, in fact, prioritizing this, who don't see lives this way. I mean, Larry, when you described that beautiful existence of well-being, including social connection, we know we're talking about the pre-Christian indigenous tribes that we pretty much wiped out because we said they were inferior. So we're kind of like, ooh, a bit of that joke's on us.
Yeah, that's very true. The indigenous peoples, they had it all. They didn't have modern technology, but they had quality of life. And along come the Europeans and destroyed their cultures. And even today, we've got missionaries, Christian missionaries in particular, who are going around trying to convert people, and they're destroying cultures. They don't see it that way, but it's. But we can't go back. We are living in this modern age. This is where we live. This is the time we're living in. And we do know we can capitalize on the technology or the research from the field of positive psychology and just start taking on these behaviors that have been proven to work, like creating community, finding a community that we can become a part of, finding meaning and purpose in our lives. It's really important that every morning when we wake up that we have something that meaningful that we're going to be doing, that a purpose, that a real purpose for us that will give our lives meaning. Formal gratitude practices. These indigenous peoples, they didn't do any of these practices. They didn't need to. But these are things we can do to improve our lives. So one of the things I teach is a formal gratitude practice. Whether for some people it's creating a gratitude journal, and every day, or for other people it's once a week, maybe on Sunday nights. For me, it was when I was doing it, it was every night. I would think of all the things during the day that I felt good about, and it's weird that little thing, just simply recalling all the things that happened that day that I felt good about, what a difference that can make in quality of life. So there are a lot of things like that.
Well, I think, when we talk about indigenous cultures, they also had a very strong spiritual basis for everything in their life. They didn't live separately from spirit. They didn't live separate from the earth. They didn't even see themselves as somehow separate from the nature that they were living within. And I think, we're getting back to that. We're reclaiming some of those parts of ourselves that we let go of as we modernized and became much more into the scientific mind as opposed to the more receptive side or creative side of the mind. And I wonder too about, our personal responsibility in all of this. And if we can take the best that we have from now and we can bridge some of the best things that we had from the past, if we can start living our lives in a completely maybe spherical direction as opposed to linearly, that we could, reclaim a lot of that abilities that we have to heal, to live our lives in joy instead of in pain or suffering. And I can't help it. I'm going to ask this question, and I apologize if it's going to offend you, but I can't help but wonder how the medical community has contributed in some way to our becoming more dependent on drugs or therapies that don't honor the natural part of ourselves. For instance, how much research is going on right now out there about the mind and its association to healing, as opposed to what new drug we can come up with that's going to solve, male impotency or, female impotency or any other, problem out there. Do you see anything changing in the medical community in that way?
I think the medical community is doing its best. They're working from a certain paradigm, a very mechanistic paradigm. Mm-hmm. And I have great respect for the medical field. However, if we rely on that, if that's all we're doing is going around to doctors and getting the best medical care, even if we're going, like you're in Seattle, you've got University of Washington, one of the top medical centers in the world. It doesn't matter. You can go to all the top doctors, But that's not nearly enough. We have to take charge of our own lives. We have to do things like doctors aren't going to help us build a sense of community, a sense of belonging. That's not what they do. Find meaning and purpose in our lives. That's not what doctors do. They do what they do, but that's why we have psychology.
And I think, unfortunately, I'm very jaded towards the medical community, or at least the doctors I've had over the last 20 years. When I moved from Southern California to Pennsylvania, I discovered a couple things. A, we have trees here, and B, we didn't in California, and I was allergic to them. Then my family kind of mentioned, oh, by the way, we have asthma in the family, because that's why we moved out of Nebraska, because your uncle was going to die. These little things that would have been nice if I had known beforehand. But when I went to the doctor, they gave me great drugs. And for about 20 years, I took them, and they relieved the symptoms, but they never came close to the problem. And frankly, when I stopped taking them and used a natural cure, I haven't had an allergy problem since, and that's 4 years. And I've got to ask, why was this never brought up to anyone outside, other than the fact that apple cider vinegar can't be patented? It just was aggravating.
Not all doctors are alike. And
true, and that's why I'm jaded, and I apologize about it. But
well, there is a field now in medicine called integrative medicine, and the field of integrative medicine takes into account all these things. So allopaths tend not to do that, but the integrative. So you've got allopaths, you've got then you have. So this is the problem with aging.
Naturopaths?
Well, naturopath wasn't the one. You've got naturopaths, but I was trying to think of the guys who work with your spine.
Oh, chiropractic.
No, not chiropractors.
Osteopaths.
Thank you.
Osteopaths.
Osteopaths.
Yay, 10 points.
Yeah. Now, osteopaths have very much the same training. They go to medical school for 4 years. They have an internship and then a residency. So they're training basically in almost the same training as the allopaths. But the osteopaths that I've met are much more open to these other things.
And, they absolutely are. And, for those of you that live in Skagit County here where I do, there's an entire new section of doctors opening up here in our little valley that are osteopaths. It's called the Residency Clinic over in Mount Vernon. And I had to go look up what is an osteopath, because I thought it was some, newfangled thing, and I wanted to know what it was all about. And I was so encouraged to find out that these were doctors that incorporated wellness techniques in with and mindfulness and a lot of different things, in considered the body from a wholeness standpoint, as opposed to, oh, well, let me work on this, you've got this stomach issue going on, let me deal with the stomach issue. And so and we're a little county compared to other counties in Washington anyway.
That's right. Osteopaths are more likely to view the whole human organism, whereas allopaths, the MDs, are more likely. So if you've got a problem, a GI problem, you go to a gastroenterologist. If you have an arthritic problem, you go to a rheumatologist. If you have a problem with your immune system, if it's autoimmune, you might go to a rheumatologist or an immunologist, or you go to, if you have an endocrine problem, you go to an endocrinologist, or a neurologist, but they're all looking at just their narrow specialty. The osteopaths tend to look more at the whole organism, how everything is connected. And also the MDs who went on for training in integrative medicine, they also view the human as in a more organic way, more holistically. And they will bring in yoga, meditation, nutrition, herbs, all kinds of things. So
just basic control of your diet. That's another place that I've yet to find a doctor that will pay attention to it. The best they'll say, "Oh, we have a nutritionist." It's like, come on. And I have a son who has epilepsy. Give me a regimen to help him with his thing, and they'll say, "Yeah, I guess that'll work," but I wouldn't recommend going off of his medication. And it's difficult because there aren't enough of them out there looking, because the AMA is out there.
Hey, just remember this: there's only two professions in the world that practice: lawyers and doctors. Everyone else becomes a professional and an expert at what they do. But I'd like to get back to your studies and ask you a question about what's cognitive fusion.
So cognitive fusion is a term that is used in the field of contextual behavioral science. It's a form of psychology. Cognitive fusion means nothing more than when we are fused with our thoughts, or entangled with our thoughts, caught up in our thoughts. So when we're ruminating, like this thing that happened yesterday it's bothering me, and I'm going over and over and over it in my mind. That's a state of cognitive fusion. Or if I'm anxious about something I'm going to be doing next week, and I just keep planning it beyond what's healthy, and I'm obsessed with it, that's a state of cognitive fusion. And the way around cognitive fusion is cognitive diffusion. And the methods of cognitive diffusion are mindfulness is one of them. Through mindfulness, we get to see that, oh, that's just a thought. Another way of working with cognitive diffusion is cognitive restructuring. So we have this thought in our head that's very unhealthy. So we look for, okay, what's the evidence to support this? And we realize, gee, I'm not coming up with any evidence to support this unhealthy belief. Therefore, I can let go of this unhealthy belief. There are other methods too, which have less evidence, like thought substitution. The method that seems to be the most respected today is acceptance and mindfulness. So we practice mindfulness, just be fully aware of the thought, and then the thought no longer has power over us. So at that point, we are diffused from the thought. The thought might still be there, but we're diffused from it. It's not harming us anymore.
I tend to use Led Zeppelin myself.
That's an interesting point. And as you're talking, I was thinking about a time I was over at Green Gulch Zen Center, which I'm sure you might even have been there a few times. And there was a class on Tibetan Buddhism that I was taking for my master's program. And the professor that was teaching it had spent time with Tibetan monks in India or whatever. And he was telling us that there is no word for psychology in Tibetan Buddhism, which at first I found kind of fascinating, but when you take a step back, it makes perfect sense. Exactly what you were just talking about is a huge tenet, really, of meditation and Buddhism, right? About detaching from your thoughts, being an observer of your thoughts. And if you can do that, then what are the benefits of that, which are pretty huge, I would imagine. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I want to say regarding, I think there's a misconception about psychology, and I think it got a bad rap from the old Freudian days, where it was believed that we had to analyze things to death. But the new psychologies today, like positive psychology and acceptance and commitment therapy, known as ACT, ACT, they are very much about not analyzing at all. They say there's really no value in, psychologizing or analyzing things. There's no value in it. That the real value is in just living your life, being fully present, identifying how do you want to live your life? What do you stand for? What do you want your life to be about? And just courageously living your life. So the old way would have been, let's say you want to go for an interview for some job you really want, but your anxiety is killing you. You can't go into the interview. So the old way would have been, through psychotherapy, you analyze what the anxiety is about. Oh, it has to do with this thing that happened in early childhood. The new way would be to acknowledge, and this is psychology. The new psychologists would say, well, yeah, the anxiety is there. And what would happen if you go to the interview anxious? And so I've done this a couple of times. I was co-facilitating a workshop at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And I had been a participant in workshops at Spirit Rock Meditation Center here in Woodacre, California, many times with some very famous presenters. So going in as the presenter myself, I was overcome with anxiety. And so if I had gone to a traditional therapist, we would have analyzed it to death. So what I did is the morning of, I acknowledged to myself that I'm feeling just overcome with anxiety. And I had the thought of calling my co-facilitator that very morning on her cell phone and saying, I can't do this. I just can't do it. I'm too anxious. You do it yourself. I'm not coming. And then I thought, well, that would help me avoid the anxiety. And the day would be over and I'd feel awful for not having done it. Or I can go up there, sit on that platform, the little stage they have, and feel anxious all day, which is what I did. And the anxiety never left. And I did an okay job co-facilitating the workshop, felt anxious all day, but I felt like I had taken charge of my life because I realized I did this. The anxiety didn't kill me. Nietzsche used to say, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. So and that was one time. And then another time I was going to be doing a demonstration of my hypnosis in front of an audience of peers. And again, just before going on, I was overcome with anxiety. And so first I used cognitive therapy to try to disprove my anxiety that, I tried to build myself up in my mind like, I've got all this expertise. That didn't work. So then I figured, why didn't I think of this before? I'm going to be doing a demonstration of hypnosis. Well, I'm going to do some self-hypnosis on myself before going on. That will certainly work. And then I can talk about that in my presentation. It didn't work. And so there I am, seconds now, like a minute to go before being introduced. And I just realized my self-hypnosis didn't work. I'm a fraud. So now my head is filled with thoughts that I'm a fraud. I can't even practice effective self-hypnosis on myself. What right do I have to be demonstrating in front of peers? But again,
and how'd that work out for you?
So I went on. I was terribly anxious. It was extremely uncomfortable. But I did it. And so I felt really good about myself again. I felt empowered. I felt like, okay, I did this without getting rid of my anxiety. Then that means I don't need to worry about my anxiety in the future. If I'm anxious in the future about something, okay, let it be there. But I can pursue a valued life. I can pursue what matters to me in life, and I don't need to worry about anxiety. I can be terribly anxious, and I can still live the life I want to live.
Question, Larry, have you had any experience with meridian tapping?
Well, my wife has done EFT and chronic healing and therapeutic touch and a whole bunch of things. I've had some exposure to Reiki, to various techniques. I have personally not gotten anything from any of that, but I know people who do. So,
because I use EFT in a number of different modalities that very, very powerful in that kind of let's get rid of the anxiety, and very, very quickly doing it. Of course, you got to be able to think on your feet fast, and oh yeah, I've got to do that, and turn around and do it. But I've found very just incredible success with it in changing where I was at the time and being able to go on with what I was doing.
Well, Larry, one of the things you've mentioned, and you as well, Andrew, is that it seems like part of this magic is having a tool set. And in fact, maybe, even though Roger said, well, let's make sure we don't get polarized, which is super legitimate, it's also about, it may always come down to the individual. In a moment, like Larry, I think I heard you say, you were incredibly empowered by not shifting your anxiety and realizing you stepped all the way up and performed and were of value, even though this was going to come with you. The day could come, the anxiety could go, but it was actually even more powerful that you were in fact just walking through it. And so that's true in my life too. Some things I shift and some things I've been empowered by knowing I can simply endure. It's not going to move, and I'm not going to be stopped either, which is kind of like resistance training in physical body, right? Sometimes we want to make it easier, and sometimes we want to engage resistance training. We don't want to avoid resistance. We want to push against it and get stronger. So, it's even in your work, does this often just boil down to an individualized treatment plan, and eventually I pretty much have to know my treatment plan or be in charge of it?
Well, I think anything that works for someone, you might as well keep using it. Different things work for different people. But there's a difference between a technique that, like EFT or self-hypnosis or cognitive restructuring or thought substitution, or there's a difference between that group of techniques, as different as they all are from each other. They all have one thing in common, and that is you do those things in order to get beyond the thing that's bothering you, as opposed to walking right into the fire and through the fire, which is, I'm not going to do anything to get rid of my anxiety. I'm just going to go and do what I want to do, and I'm going to do it with all my anxiety. That's different, and that, I think, is more growth producing. The other things can work, they do work, but they're not as growth producing. Walking right into the fire, walking onto the stage with all my terror, and it was terror, and just going on with the show with my fear, that was more growth producing than any of my other techniques. Even if my self-hypnosis had worked, I'm glad it didn't work, because I learned more about myself from going on to the stage with my fear and performing with the fear.
Yeah, to that end, sometimes illness of some kind is serving a purpose for us then. Just the absence of all unpleasantry in life doesn't necessarily produce the richest, most abundant life experience.
I've met a number of people who have told me that their cancer diagnosis, or back in the 90s, told me that their AIDS diagnosis, this was before the modern treatments for AIDS, that their diagnosis was the best thing that ever happened to them. And it always caught me off guard, like, wow, you've been diagnosed with something and it's going to kill you. And even though at that time, especially, there was no treatment, effective treatment, and they believed they were going to die. They really believed after receiving this AIDS diagnosis they were going to die, and in fact, most of them did die. But despite that, they still were able to say, "It's the best thing that ever happened to me." And when I would talk to them, they'd say, "Well, this is what it took to get me to fully live my life." And it's like, wow. I hope it doesn't take that for me. But that's what going on with the show, with the fear. Instead of using a technique to get rid of the anxiety, to just do whatever I was planning on doing with the anxiety, that's similar. That's similar to it. I mean, I wouldn't compare it with actually being told you're going to die, but there is something about really waking up. Sometimes that's what it takes for us to wake up and just live our lives more fully, more vibrantly. And to stop thinking, to get out of our minds, and to stop analyzing everything, and just really just live and experience. But our minds get in the way. But then, being diagnosed with a terrible disease, that works for a lot of people.
Do you know, this is definitely out of your field, but there's an author, I think his name is Nassim Taleb. He wrote The Black Swan. He largely writes about economics, and the Black Swan was the idea that you can't predict the big disruptor that's going to happen in economics. He wrote it before the 2008 crash. Anyway, he's written a book. He was largely involved in hedge fund risk management assessment. So he's a high-level economist. So this is what had brought him into this. So he writes this book that's very interesting called Anti-Fragile. He says it's anti-fragile because he has no other name for this, but it's essentially that we only see two models, both with our lives and in economics and in all these things, that we have an idea of something being fragile, my health is fragile, or we have this idea that the alternative is robust. If I'm fragile and there's a large impact, I'm going to fail. If I'm robust and there's a large impact, I'll recover, right? But he says there's actually a huge common mechanism we're denying called anti-fragile, in which case a system that's anti-fragile is actually getting stronger every time there's small and repeated shocks to the system. So in fact, you don't want to avoid shocks to the system. Most of our psychology, most of our Western belief systems, financially, personally, are all about avoiding and mitigating risk, right? And that's not, in fact, potentially producing the healthiest economies, bodies, etc. So very much back to a bodybuilding model, right? By engaging small resistances, I get stronger and stronger and stronger. And so these, dismissing the resistance function of some of our illnesses. Obviously, life-threatening is it's super challenging, but many of our illnesses may just force us to get stronger in some area.
Yeah. I think it can work that way. It does work that way for a lot of people, but this is sort of like the question we explored earlier. I don't know how to bring that about. I mean, I just don't know how to bring it about. I had something I wanted to say and now I forgot what it was.
Well, I was going to say something too, is it possible that this is a personal journey for people, that what works for you may not exactly work for me, may not exactly work for Bryn. And so in that case, it has to be a journey that each person embarks on and not something that you can just teach. I mean, there may be some, groundwork type things that you can teach to people about mindfulness or about how to meditate or think different tools that are out there like that. But in the end, it all comes down to me, as a person. How am I going to react? What am I going to do? How am I taking personal responsibility for this?
I think the most important thing we can do is take personal responsibility, because then we feel empowered. In fact, then we are empowered, And when we're empowered, we're going to be living a higher quality of life. So by not trying to get rid of my anxiety, I mean, actually, I did try, but it didn't work. But so, but so when it didn't work, I finally, okay, I accept it. I mean, there was nothing else I could do. And so once I allowed myself to have it, whether it's anxiety or anything else, the economics thing, that was interesting. I never thought of that before. But, you know, in the newer psychologies, positive psychology, contextual behavioral science, or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, it's all about, okay, I have these awful thoughts, these icky feelings, and it's okay. I'm not happy about them being there, but I'm not going to let them interfere with my life. And so I'm going to live my life feeling whatever I'm feeling, thinking whatever thoughts I'm thinking. And that just keeps making me stronger every time I do that. So I think that's really the most important thing we can do, is to be fully with whatever we are experiencing. The class I taught yesterday was about self-acceptance, and and someone asked, well, what's the difference between self-acceptance and self-esteem? And I said, well, self-esteem is this thing you have, but self-acceptance is something you can practice. And the way you practice it is by accepting. If you accept your thoughts, if you accept your feelings, if you accept your bodily sensations, however painful they are, then you're accepting yourself. So we accept ourselves when we accept all the parts of ourselves. And it's very hard to have self-acceptance if we're pushing away parts of ourselves, if we're disowning parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Larry, would you say, though, accepting those thoughts without judgment is the key to accepting those thoughts?
But it's hard. Well, I might be judging them. I might be judging the thoughts. So then what I do is I acknowledge that, oh, there's that thought and there's the judgment of the thought. I'm judging myself for even having the thought. And then, so I can still go about my business, even with the thought that I'm, this self-critical judgment about having the thought.
Yeah, because I as I'm listening to you, I think for me, it's like, okay, you can have any thought that you want, and any thought is neutral until you give it a meaning, until you judge it. And then all of a sudden it becomes charged.
Yeah, and then it's charged, but even though it's charged, I can still, I don't need to change it. I don't need to get rid of it.
Right. You just be the neutral observer, and it'll go away.
Yeah.
But if you attach judgment to it, now you're hooked.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to some extent, I found for myself, again, Janet's right. This is all our own little mix, but there's some part of me that's never stopped responding like a 2-year-old. I don't mean from all of my thoughts are 2-year-olds, but I'll tell you what happens if I'm too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, right? Thoughts go down very familiar patterns, like a 2-year-old who's screaming and won't go to bed. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need to eat properly. I need to get some rest. I've been stressed out. Something's triggered me. Just as my mind has some control over my body, I do find my body, pure body, has some control over my thoughts and my mind. It will originate sensations that then spin up a bunch of these thoughts. So, that self-care to some extent still becomes, that's part of the absence of judgment. Okay, it's all right. I can decide that other people should be run off the road. I don't have to do it. I'm tired. I just need to go home.
Right. Yeah, I act like a 2-year-old sometimes too. And then I start beating myself up for my ridiculous, absurd behavior. And then then I'm beating myself up for it. I'm feeling ashamed. So then the thing that I need to do is to accept that, oh, okay, yeah, boy, I definitely did act like a jerk. I mean, I did. It's true. There were witnesses who can validate what a jerk I was. And so there's no denying it. And it's just what happened. And now to accept myself with all of that, yeah, I'm not perfect yet.
Well,
or maybe you are. Maybe
I have
being
to,
that way is perfect.
or I have to value self-care differently, right? So at some point, my brain, the human brain may never fully transcend if I'm not getting my needs met, the basic hierarchical of needs. I mean, I don't necessarily have to act on my thoughts, but I do notice that I have them. And I have to go back and say, wait a minute, I got to not skip lunch. Here's the story, right? I've started to have a low blood sugar. I know if I'm not sleeping, just like we know when we're in grief, right? When you go through a lot of grief and you realize, okay, be very gentle, be careful with myself. I'm going to be accident prone. I'm going to be hypersensitive, right? We recognize things will affect our thoughts.
There are two fields that are important to be aware of. There's a field of psychophysiology and the field of physiological psychology. Psychophysiology is the field that studies the effect of mind on body, the effect of thought on physiology, where psychophysiologists study how thoughts actually alter biochemistry in the body. Then there are the physiological psychologists, and what they look at is the effect of the physiologic changes on the mind. So if we are hungry, tired, whatever, the effect on those physiological changes on the thought process. And it's good to be able to be aware that, when we are tired or angry or hungry, we're going to have thoughts that are different. And they're probably not going to be healthy thoughts. We might start snapping at people if we're really hungry, or we're coming on down with a cold. We might become very irritable and be saying things to people that we're going to regret. So that's the biochemistry changing the thought process. So it's an up, down, up process.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never experienced that before.
Sure. Roger, the only not 2-year-old here.
Yeah, exactly. Roger, born at a fully mature 21.
I'm 3.
3. Okay, 3. All right, that's good.
Roger, you might want to mention to your mother that potty training you at gunpoint may not have worked out like she'd hoped.
Oh dear.
I'll let you ask her that.
Crazy people. So where are we with time, guys? We're at 2:41. I can't believe it. We're 20 minutes from the end of the show here. And there's a subject in your book that I would really like to get to before we close up today, and that is that of advocacy. Everybody being their own advocate when they get involved with the healthcare system. As you said, or whoever said this, that, if you've got a broken bone, of course you want to go to a medical doctor that's going to be able to help you with that. If you have something going on in your body, a medical doctor is going to be, somebody that you want to visit and talk with about the issue. But how can you what are some things that we should be looking for in terms of advocating for ourselves? I mean, you talk about second opinions and things like that. Kind of take us through, from a doctor's perspective, what can I do to empower myself in my visit with you?
Yeah. So there's a term called an empowered patient. And an empowered patient is, and some people don't like the term because the word patient implies powerless. That's okay. But someone who advocates for him or herself is someone who takes charge of their health. So there are a lot of people who go for their annual physical, and otherwise they'll go to the doctor if they're sick, but most of the time, they're not thinking about it. They'll just show up at the doctor's door. The doctor asks, so what's going on with you today? And some patients will actually say something like, well, I don't know. That's why I'm here. It's for you to figure out.
It's mostly men that do that, right?
Actually, men do have the reputation for doing that more than women. That's true. But I mean, and someone who's really empowered, someone who advocates for themselves is someone who, so I'll tell you what I do. In between appointments, I keep on my notepad in my computer, and it's in my iPhone too. I've got these notes, and I just keep adding to the notes in between appointments. And I've got one set of notes for my immunologist, one set of notes for my primary care doc, one set of notes for other people. And so then when I go for my appointment, I pull out my iPhone and I say, and this works, this is, as I get older, this works better and better. I say, my memory isn't what it used to be. It's hard to pull that off when you're 30, but, and would it be all right with you if I record? No doctor has ever refused that. I have had clients who've told me their doctors don't want them to record, but no doctor has ever told me, and I think it's because of the way I ask. They're not afraid of litigation with me because they can tell by my manner that, no, I'm just really serious about my health, and I don't want to miss anything. So what I do is I start the recording, the voice memo. I've got that recording. And while it's recording, I open up my notepad so I can be referring to my notes. So there I am referring to my notes, asking the doctor questions. The doctor is answering, and everything's getting recorded. When I get home, I write it all down on a Word document. And if he says some things that are about immunology, I put that on my immunology document. Other things about hematology goes on that document, and so forth. Then I also do some research on my own. So if I'm given a diagnosis, I go home, I go to Google Scholar or PubMed or NIH, and I look up the diagnosis and I learn all I can learn. If I have a new symptom and I think I know what it might be, I go online. Again, going online can be very dangerous. So I always tell people, know where you're going. I have a page on my website that is a long list of reputable websites, non-commercial websites, where you can get great information. And so I research it. If I can't figure it out, then I make an appointment. I don't ignore it. I practice. I eat nutrient-dense meals. I try to get a good amount of sleep. I get a lot of exercise. I probably spend probably over an hour and a half a day exercising. An aerobic workout, a yoga workout, a Tai Chi. I go through the Tai Chi form. I go for an afternoon. My wife and I go for an afternoon walk. So there's lots of exercise. I spend a lot of time with friends because for my health, the evidence is there. Community. So that's why I say people who just only call the doctor when they're sick and they don't think about their diet or exercise or sleep or anything. They're not going to be healthy. Those are disempowered people. But the most important thing I wanted to say about this is just doing these things means we are taking charge of our life. And that in and of itself, even if we're doing some of the wrong things, if we've taken charge of our lives, then we will be healthier and happier. We will be empowered. Even if some of the food you're eating isn't really healthy food, even if you're not getting enough sleep every night, it doesn't matter. If your intention is there and you're taking charge of your life, you're stepping up to the plate, you will be happier and healthier just by doing that.
All very important points. I think I had a funny story about that. Is it WebMD? I think it's one of those places where you can do symptom checkers. I had a 16-year-old son who was experiencing issues. So I went to the WebMD and put in his symptoms. And what came back was a possibility of liver cancer. I mean, I totally freaked out. I mean, I am usually not that way, but I was freaked. And now I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Who am I going to call? What doctor needs this, information? And so it is true. Be very careful if you're going to go online and do symptom checking, that you be, sort of aware that they're going to give you this range of things that could possibly be the problem.
Yeah, yeah. The internet has probably killed people. Liver cancer.
In a 17-year-old kid. I mean, come on.
But you have to finish the rest of the story. What was it?
Yeah.
He had acid reflux.
I was going to say, or constipation, right? He's 17.
I mean, it was just something so stupid, but I mean, it seemed really bad at the time, what was happening. It didn't occur. He was nice and thin and young and active. And so acid reflux was not coming to mind when it, was something that he was experiencing. So anyway, it's just kind of a funny story, but it's true. So many people can go on there and look up these things and go, oh my God, I'm now dying.
Yeah. And also people get information that, so I met someone who was vegan, and I do believe it's possible to be healthy being vegan if you're really doing it right. But I asked, why are you vegan? Because most vegans that I've met, they're opposed to the killing of animals. But no, this person said, oh, because we're too acidic. Oh, okay. So I said, what do you mean we? So tell me more. And there are people, they get this information on the internet, things like, we're too acidic, we need to eat vegan. And then, if I ask them, well, so what is your pH? They say, what's that? And I say, well, your blood pH should be somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45. And if it's like 7.5, you're pretty alkalotic. If it's 7.3, you're too acidotic. And those extremes are very unhealthy. But the body has compensatory mechanisms that keep them in place in health, metabolic compensation, so forth. So it's almost impossible to be too acidic. People think if they're drinking too much of an acidic juice or something, they're going to be too acidic. They get these ideas from the internet, and it's just total nonsense. So it's important to know where to go on the internet. And I can't think of what to call the page, but there is a page, resources maybe. There's a resources button on my website with a drop-down menu, and one of them I think is of all a long list of really reputable websites for good, solid information.
Larry, share with the listeners what your website is and how they can get a copy of your book.
The website is www.larryberkelhammer.com. Should I spell my name?
I believe we have the graphic. It's probably being shown.
Okay.
Let's check. Yes, everybody's information's been rotating, so that's good. We already have that information being shown up on the screen.
And the book is, locally in this area, I know most of the bookstores in my area are stocking my book, but that's because I teach a local course in 2 different areas. But elsewhere, I don't know how well my book is being stocked. It's orderable. You can buy it. Amazon probably has the lowest price, but problem with Amazon, you've got to buy more than one book because to get free shipping, it's $35. Barnes & Noble, you can order from them. Their minimal shipping is only $25, so they're probably better.
Or you get Amazon Prime, and I got your book for free shipping.
Why don't you just raise the price of your book to $35?
No, I don't think so. Actually, we were going to originally price it at $24.95, and at that time, Amazon had free shipping at $25. So we went up by a nickel, raised the price of the book by a nickel, and called it $25. And like I think the month my book was published, Amazon raised their minimum shipping to $35.
Well, unless you're an Amazon Prime person, which we are, this family, I ended up getting your book for free. Well, I mean, I paid for the book, but got the shipping for free. But it's really an interesting book. I loved reading, the different parts of it. And I think having you on the show and being able to talk to you about all these different things has been really fantastic. And I thank you so much for coming and sharing with us your experiences and some of the techniques that we can use. Is there anything in parting today that you would like to leave us with? Thoughts, ideas? What are you doing next?
Well, first I just want to say, I have never before been interviewed by people asked these kinds of questions. You all ask the best questions I've ever been asked.
We're used to that.
We are awesome. I mean, come on.
Yeah. What I'm doing these days mostly is I'm writing 2 articles a week for Psych Central, and I'm teaching 2 courses a week locally in Marin County, California. One course is called In Your Own Hands, which is based on my book, and the other course is called Medicine of Aging, which is also about the book. But the main thing that I teach and the primary message that I teach is something we've talked about a lot here today, which is that it's about self-empowerment. It's really about self-efficacy, self-empowerment, taking charge of your life, taking charge of your healthcare, your self-care, practicing loving self-care, not being. I mean, you want to rely on your doctors, but if you only do that, that's not enough. Do all the other things too, and the other things are not just diet and exercise and sleep. They include things like social support, finding meaning and purpose, practicing, actually having a conscious gratitude practice, laughter, those things.
Hey, Larry, I have a question for you. I know we're almost out of time, but this has been a recurring thing I've noticed over the last couple of hours about community. And I think that, I have my own views on that. I think it's innate in us, right? That whole tribal thing.
Right.
Why is that such a big, important thing for people to look at? Because I think that's an important message. So can you speak to that a little bit about how you came to that and what you would encourage people to do?
Yesterday in my class, I presented on self-acceptance, and I started off the class showing a video showing the trailer for the movie Precious. I don't know, have you all seen the movie Precious?
I think so.
It's a disturbing movie.
No, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. So what people saw in the trailer was this young girl being brutalized by her mother. Our experience with other people, especially family, impacts our lives positively and negatively. And so what I told the people in my class, people like that girl in Precious, what would be most healing for her would be to be in a community of people where she's loved and accepted just the way she is. There is nothing, I don't believe there's anything as healing as being in a community. When we are surrounded by people who really value our presence, and we feel like we are contributing to them too, that we're a valued contributing member of the community. I put that at the top of the list. I don't believe, even though I talk about mindfulness a lot, I've got 3 chapters in my book on mindfulness because of all the evidence, but I've also seen overwhelming evidence of the power of social connections and community. And if someone was going to do just one thing, I would say do that. Make as many friends as you can. And I'm not talking about Facebook friends.
Real face-to-face people in your life that you love and adore and love you back.
Right. People who you can go to them for help and they can come to you for help.
Mm-hmm.
The mutuality is there.
Yeah. Well, that's going to have to be the final word. We're about 2 minutes left. I'd like to take this moment to talk to you about what's coming up next week. Roger, I'm going to throw that to you. What's our show next week?
Well, it's interesting that Larry was
I thought it was a great segue.
Right. Next week, we're going to be interviewing Michelle Burns, who's putting together a program on self-love and teaching people how to love themselves more fully and deeply. And she has a 365-day program that she's putting together. So we're going to be interviewing her, and we're all looking forward to that. So I think it is a good segue from what you're from this show to the next. So
absolutely perfect.
Mary, thank you for everything that you've shared. It's been fun.
Yes, thank you so much, Larry. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I have really enjoyed all of you. It's been great fun.
Well, next time you have something you want to share, look us up and we'll fit you in somewhere.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for everybody out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you'll join us next week with Michelle Burns on talking about self-love. As we've heard from Larry Berkelhammer here, that's an important part of our healing and our health. Thank you, panelists, for being here today. And especially thank you to Conscious Consumer Network, because without you, we would not be here.
Thanks,
everybody have a great week.
Thank you.